If you're someone who feels a bit stuck spiritually or with your meditation practice, this video is going to give you the clarity that you need to move beyond it. When I was really young, I remember talking to my meditation teacher, my spiritual teacher, and saying to him, things aren't really progressing for me. I don't really feel like I've expanded. I feel like I've just plateaued, and my meditations are a bit dull. Things don't seem to be moving beyond where I am at the minute. I feel like I've hit a bit of a plateau with it all. And he responded to me, this was by email, and he responded to me in a simple way and just said, I want you to look into give and take. And I didn't really understand what he meant initially, but when I dissected it a bit later on, I suddenly realised what he did mean. And quite simply, he meant you're not putting in enough work. You're wanting the fruits, you're wanting the rewards from the work that you've not put in. You're not putting in enough. You think you're putting in enough because you're following the social norms of what's enough. But if you want to take this work really seriously, you need to be putting in a lot more. And he didn't mean that meant sit down for hours and hours and hours every day in meditation, because meditation is an umbrella term, and there are many forms of meditation and many ways that we can develop spiritually outside of just adding hours of meditation in. That's not necessarily what we can do, A, and need to do, B. But I want to tell you a story which hopefully will help you to understand what I'm trying to get at here. When I was about 12 years old, I remember being at home with my dad, and my dad's friend came over for dinner. And he was a buff guy, he'd just been getting into the gym, and he was talking about his training partner, but he was talking about him as if he was like on a pedestal, like he was a superhero. And he said, he does these things called Ironman triathlons. And I was 12 years old, I'd never heard of an Ironman triathlon. The longest that I understood a human being could run was a 26.2 mile marathon, because my uncle had done one, and I'd heard about other people who had done these things, and I thought, well, a marathon, that's obviously what human beings can do. And he started talking about what an Ironman was. He said, it's a 2.4 mile swim. And I remember listening in and being like, okay, that sounds long. It's a 112 mile bike ride, and being like, wow, what? They do a 2.4 mile swim and then a 112 mile bike ride. Yeah, and then they do a 26.2 mile marathon. And I remember in that moment, my mind just expanded. What I knew was possible for a human being to do had just suddenly been expanded, quite simply. I had a limit that was here, which was a 26.2 mile marathon, and now it was here. And I knew in that moment that I would do one day, and eventually when I was older, when I was 23, I believe, I did go on to do an Ironman, and I raced Ironman, and I raced half Ironman quite competitively, and was in that world for quite a long time. But coming back to the story, before that I had a limit based upon the social norms. Now admittedly, even an Ironman is a social norm, it's just a bigger one. It's a mental creation of what we can do, but it's a slightly bigger mental creation of what we can do. And we do this all the time when it comes to meditation and when it comes to our spiritual work. We often will look at, what is a normal amount of time to meditate for? Most people will say, maybe 20 minutes. When you begin in 10 minutes, when you get into it a bit more, maybe 20, 30 minutes. And there's a few outliers to the rule who might do like an hour, and they're considered really, unusual. And anything beyond that is like monk-like territory. So we have these norms that we consider to be a normal amount of time to spend doing this. And then we have the idea of what we should receive in order as a byproduct of doing that work. Most people will say, you meditate for half an hour a day. And then we hear about all of the benefits that you get from meditation, and we hear about these amazing mystical experiences that some people have, and we think that that is purely going to come from doing just this half an hour a day of practice. But what if I said to you, you should be doing 12 hours a day? You should actually be doing 12 hours a day on your spiritual work. I'm not saying you should now, but I'm just saying, imagine if that was the norm. Imagine if when you started learning about meditation, they said, you actually probably want to be doing it for 12 hours a day to really make moves. Your mind would suddenly expand, and that half an hour a day would feel like nothing. It would feel like you almost worthless. I feel like it's almost not worthwhile. Now, before we get ahead, I'm not saying that. I'm not suggesting that at all. Half an hour is very, very much worthwhile. And actually, the time we spend sitting down in formal meditation is not the important thing. It's the intent of it. However, when I'm talking about meditation in this context, I'm talking about it in the form of contemplating the truth of who you are, contemplating reality, prayer, repeating a mantra, repeating the name of the divine if you follow a deity or have a belief in someone, some form of God. There are many forms of meditation, and all of these things that I just mentioned there are, come under the umbrella of meditation. And you've also got the seated formal practice, which we're all most of us are familiar with. So what I'm really trying to get across to you in this video is to sit down with yourself and genuinely ask yourself, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? If you're someone who feels like you're not really progressing, or that things have plateaued, or you're not feeling that deep connection that you really desire, that deep connection with God or the divine, or whatever you call it, are you doing the work? Are you putting in enough time? And as I said, you might be listening to this thinking, well, I've got 3 kids, I'm married, I'm busy, I've got a job, I haven't got time. I'm not talking about sitting down in meditation for hours and hours a day, because I understand that not everyone has the time to do that, and that's totally fair enough. But what most of us do have the time to do is to fill all of the other gaps in the day where we're commuting to work, where we're doing the washing up, where we're doing the laundry, where we're on a run, where we're on a treadmill. There's so many pockets and little periods of the day where we're not doing anything, and we could fill those pockets rather than just watching videos or listening to podcasts. Although those things are good in moderation, we could fill them with prayer, with contemplating who we are. Why am I here? How many times a day do you sit here and sit with yourself and say, why am I here? What is this? Why have I got this body? Where did this existence come from? Who am I? Who am I beyond this body? This is the type of contemplation and direction that we need to be putting our mind in. We need to be directing our mind down these avenues of thinking, and although the answers might not necessarily come directly through the thought, it's the aspiration for more understanding that's important, and actually giving it more mental energy. Going back to the Ironman analogy, to begin with, when I was training for the Ironman at the peak, I was putting in about 20 hours a week around my full-time job. I was full-time as a heating engineer at the time, and I was putting in 20 hours a week of training. I didn't do that from the beginning, of course, because I would have got injured like that, and my body wasn't acclimatized to that kind of amount of time and energy and effort. But I probably started on 3-4 hours a day, and I increased it over time. Over a few months, I increased it to 4-5, and a few more months, 5-6, and by the time of me doing the event, a few weeks before, I was up to 20 hours a week. The same can be said with your spiritual work. You're not going to just all day long be thinking about it immediately. But if you're meditating, let's say, half an hour a day at the moment, you could probably spend another half an hour of the day at some points scattered throughout where you're thinking a bit more about this type of thing. And in a couple of weeks' time, you go up that to an hour. And in a few months' time, you might up that to a couple of hours by that point. So you can see how it's a gradual progression to giving your mind more to this work. And I suppose what I'm trying to point out is that we have these social norms and these kind of mental constructions of how much time we should put in, how much effort we should dedicate to this, what it should look like. And it is purely a mental construction based on what we've read, what we've seen other people do, and what we believe to be true. But if we could just expand that and say, no, I'm going to give this much more. I'm going to give this much more of my time, much more of my energy. You will probably feel the rewards that you're actually after in terms of that deep inner connection with the divine, understanding yourself more. Things will come, I promise you that. When you put in the effort, things do come. And I hope today's video is really going to inspire you to look in an honest way at your own personal practice. And I've had to do this as well many times, where I've had to stop myself and think, am I doing enough? And quite often I'm not. So I hope today's video inspires you, gives you some reason to reflect and look at your practice. If you are looking for help with your meditation practice itself, if you're looking for more guidance spiritually, and you want to be part of a community that motivates you and inspires you, then feel free to check out mine. I'll leave a link in the description, but failing that, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.